All right, so welcome to our deep dive into the Housing Act of 2004.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at UK housing law today,
Okay.
specifically focusing on England, and we are going to be going through all of the official government documents and legal texts,
Sounds good.
and hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a better understanding of the Housing Act 2004.
Fantastic.
And especially, the parts that might actually affect you, even if you've never read through a law book before.
Yeah, I think that's so important because it affects so many people.
Yeah.
This act, millions of people's lives are impacted by this.
Yeah.
It sets the rules for everything from, renting a room to managing a whole property.
Right.
It's huge.
Yeah. And it's something that we should all kind of have a basic understanding of.
Absolutely.
So let's jump right into it.
Okay.
One of the things that I think makes this act so important is how it deals with HMOs,
Right.
houses in multiple occupation.
Yes,
You've probably heard that term thrown around a lot.
for sure.
But you might not actually know what it means legally.
Yeah, definitely. And the act is very specific about its definition of an HMO.
Okay.
It's not just about the number of people living in a property.
Okay.
It's about whether those people form separate households
Right.
and whether they share facilities like a kitchen or a bathroom.
Okay.
So the Act actually uses 3 tests to figure this out.
3 tests.
Yeah.
That sounds a bit complicated.
Well, it's not as bad as it sounds. It's just that the Act is trying to cover a lot of different situations.
Okay.
So you might have a group of students all sharing a house,
Right.
or you could have a building that's been converted into separate flats,
Okay.
which are then rented out individually.
Okay.
So these tests are trying to make sure that we're protecting tenants in all sorts of different scenarios.
Okay, so it's about being thorough.
Yeah,
But what about those tests? Can you break down those 3 tests for us?
sure. So the first test is the standard test,
Okay.
and this one looks at whether people are sharing facilities. Then there's the self-contained flat test,
Okay.
and this one focuses on how the building was originally designed.
Right.
So was it always separate flats,
Okay.
or was it converted at some point later on?
Okay.
And then finally, there's the converted building test,
Okay.
and that one's for buildings that have been divided up,
Okay.
but might still have some shared areas.
Okay, so it sounds like regardless of which test is being used,
Yeah.
the key factor is whether there are multiple households living under one roof.
You got it.
Okay.
Now, the next question you might be asking is, what does the Act actually consider a single household?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question because it's not always super clear.
Yeah, exactly. It can be more than just a traditional family.
Okay.
So, for instance, a group of foster children living with their foster parent would be considered a single household.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we figured out what an HMO is.
Yeah.
But why is there so much emphasis on licensing them?
Well, that's a great question.
Then why is it so important?
Licensing is all about making sure that HMOs are properly managed and safe for the people who live there.
Okay.
So there are actually 2 main types of licensing.
Okay.
There's mandatory licensing and additional licensing.
Okay, so mandatory licensing, is that for all HMOs?
No, it's not for all HMOs.
Okay.
It kicks in for certain types of HMOs,
Okay.
like those that are over 3 stories high,
Okay.
with 5 or more people from at least 2 households living there.
Okay, so like a big HMO,
Yeah, exactly.
you automatically need a license.
Exactly.
Okay, but what about additional licensing?
Well, that's where local authorities can step in.
Okay, what do you mean step in?
So if a local authority notices that there's a pattern of HMOs in their area that are being managed poorly,
Okay.
they can actually designate that area as an area that needs additional licensing.
Okay.
So this means that even smaller HMOs
Okay.
that wouldn't normally need a license
Right.
might need one in these specific zones.
Okay, so it's like a targeted approach
Precisely.
for specific neighborhoods
Yeah, it's about trying to tackle problem areas.
and protect both the tenants
Yeah.
and the community.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the mandatory licensing for large HMOs
Yes.
and then the additional licensing for certain areas.
Right.
But what counts as being managed poorly?
Well, think about things like serious fire safety hazards
Okay.
or ignored repair requests.
Right.
Maybe rubbish piling up and affecting public health.
Right.
These are all signs that a property isn't being run properly
Okay.
and might need some closer attention.
So it's about holding landlords accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Act doesn't stop at licensing.
Oh, really?
It actually has some real teeth when it comes to enforcement.
Ooh. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, so local housing authorities have a whole toolkit that they can use.
Okay.
So they can issue what are called improvement notices,
Okay.
which give landlords a deadline to fix specific problems.
Okay.
Or in more serious cases, they can issue a prohibition order,
Oh, wow.
which can actually stop a property from being used until things are sorted out.
Wow, so it's not just a slap on the wrist.
No, it's not.
There are real consequences for not complying with the act.
Absolutely. The act is very serious about ensuring safe and decent housing.
Okay, and I think that's really important.
Yes.
But what about the tenants in all of this?
Well, that's a crucial part of the act as well.
Okay.
It's not just about holding landlords accountable.
Right.
It's also about providing tenants with specific rights.
Okay, what kind of rights are we talking about here?
Well, one of the big ones is protection from eviction without proper notice
Okay.
and a valid reason.
Okay.
So a landlord can't just kick someone out on a whim.
Right.
They need to follow a proper legal process.
Right.
And tenants have the right to defend themselves.
Okay, so no more landlords changing the locks overnight.
Exactly.
Okay, good.
And remember those improvement notices we talked about
Yeah.
for repairs.
Yes.
Well, tenants actually have the right to request those repairs
Oh, okay.
for certain hazards that are affecting their safety and well-being.
So if the heating breaks down in the middle of winter,
Yeah.
the tenant can demand action.
Yes, and the landlord is obligated to deal with those issues in a timely manner.
That's really reassuring to know.
Yeah.
But I imagine with rights come responsibilities as well.
Of course, the Act sets out clear responsibilities for tenants, too.
Okay, let's hear it.
All right, so first and foremost, tenants need to pay their rent on time.
Okay,
And as agreed upon in their tenancy agreement,
that seems fair.
yeah, they're also responsible for taking reasonable care of the property,
Okay.
avoiding damage, and keeping things clean and tidy.
So no wild parties that result in damage to the property.
Right, and the Act also addresses disruptive behavior,
Okay.
like noise complaints. So it gives landlords and local authorities tools to deal with antisocial behavior.
Right.
But it also ensures that tenants who are accused of such behavior have a fair chance to respond.
Okay, so it's about finding a balance
Exactly.
between everyone's rights and responsibilities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we've only just scratched the surface of this act. There's
Yeah.
still so much more to explore.
There's a lot more to explore.
Yeah.
So stay tuned as we dive deeper into the Housing Act of 2004 in part 2.
Looking forward to it.
All right.
Sounds good.
See you then. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Housing Act of 2004.
Yes, we're back.
Last time we were talking about, how the act helps ensure safe and well-managed housing,
Right.
especially when it comes to HMOs.
Right. All those different tests and things.
Yeah, we talked about the enforcement tools that local authorities have.
Yeah, we talked about how they can issue improvement notices
Yeah,
and even prohibition orders if a landlord isn't complying.
right. And we also explored that really important balance between landlord and tenant rights.
Absolutely. Making sure that everyone involved understands, what's expected of them.
Yeah, but I think one thing that we kind of glossed over a little bit is what happens when a landlord doesn't comply?
The consequence?
Yeah, and specifically the financial consequences.
Yeah.
Because I think, ignoring the rules can really hit a landlord's wallet where it hurts.
It can, and we did touch on rent repayment orders briefly,
Yeah.
but let's unpack that a bit more.
Okay, so let's say a landlord is operating an HMO without a license.
Oh,
Or they just haven't fixed some serious problems despite an improvement notice.
right.
What happens then?
Well, the tenants can actually apply to a tribunal
Okay.
for a rent repayment order.
Okay.
And that means they could get back some of the rent they paid while the landlord was breaking the rules.
Okay, so it's like a financial penalty
Yeah,
that directly benefits the tenants who are affected by the landlord's actions.
that's the idea. It's meant to really make those landlords think twice
Okay.
about cutting corners or ignoring their obligations.
So how much are we talking here? Like, how much can tenants actually claim back?
Well, it really depends on the situation.
Okay.
But in some cases, a tenant could get back up to 12 months worth of rent.
12?
Yeah, it's a big chunk of change.
That's a lot of money.
It is.
So that's a pretty strong incentive to follow the rules.
It is, and it really shows how seriously the Act takes these matters.
Yeah.
So when they decide the amount the tribunal will take into account, things like the severity of the breach
Okay.
and, the impact it had on the tenants.
So there's a process involved. It's
Yeah.
not just an automatic refund.
No. The tenant actually has to go to the tribunal.
Okay.
They need to provide evidence.
Okay.
They need to make their case,
Okay.
and then the tribunal will make a judgment.
Okay. So there's a system in place to make sure things are fair.
Exactly.
But what if the landlord disagrees?
Well, They can appeal,
Okay.
but it's not a simple process.
Okay.
There are only limited grounds for appealing,
Okay.
and they need to present strong legal arguments.
Okay.
It's not easy to overturn a tribunal's decision.
So the system is designed to protect tenants and make sure the landlords are held accountable.
Absolutely.
But it's not just about rent repayment orders, is it?
No, it's not.
What other kind of financial weapons do local authorities have?
Well, they can also issue what are called civil penalties
Okay.
for certain breaches of the act.
Okay, so that's like a fine.
Yeah, think of it like a fine,
Okay.
but for less serious offenses.
Okay.
Things that wouldn't necessarily go to court.
Right. So it's a way to deal with smaller infractions.
Exactly. A more proportionate response.
Yeah.
Depending on, what the breach actually was.
Yeah. Okay.
The amount for a civil penalty is usually going to be lower than a fine,
Okay.
but they can still add up.
They could still add up. Yeah.
So landlords really need to be on top of their game and understand the rules,
Right.
because otherwise they could be facing some pretty serious financial consequences.
Absolutely. And, aside from HMOs and licensing,
Yeah.
the Housing Act also tackles the issue of empty properties
It does.
that are causing problems for communities. And I was
Yeah.
thinking about this the other day. I was like, surely someone can leave their property empty if they want to.
Well, you're right. Generally, owning a property comes with that, right?
All right.
But what if that empty property is attracting antisocial behavior?
Okay.
Or it's actually posing a safety risk to the neighborhood?
Okay. I see how that would be a problem.
Yeah, and that's where empty dwelling management orders come in.
Empty dwelling management orders.
Or HMOs for short.
DNMOs. Okay.
These are powerful tools that allow local authorities to actually step in and take over the management of a property
Wow.
that's been left empty and problematic for a significant amount of time.
Okay, so it's not just about a house being empty.
No.
It needs to be causing some kind of harm.
Right, so maybe it's attracting squatters,
Right.
or vandalism is happening,
Okay.
or it's even putting people's safety at risk.
Okay, so if a property is empty and it's causing trouble,
Yeah.
the local authority can step in.
They can, but the act does include safeguards to protect the owner's rights.
Okay, that's good.
So the local authority needs to prove that the property actually meets the criteria for an EDMO,
Okay.
and they need to get authorization from a tribunal.
Right, so it's not just a decision that they can make on their own.
No, it ensures that the owner's side of the story is heard
Right.
and that everything's been reviewed properly.
Okay, and even after the EDMO is in place,
Yeah.
the owner still has options,
They
right?
do. They can challenge the order,
Okay.
they can appeal the decision,
Okay.
or they can work with the local authority
Right.
to, address the issues.
Yeah.
Bring the property back into use.
Okay, so it's not a permanent takeover.
No, it's about finding a resolution
Okay.
to a problem.
And hopefully bring that empty property back to life.
Exactly. And empty properties can really drag down neighborhoods.
Yeah.
They attract crime, they lower property values,
Right.
they create a sense of neglect.
Yeah.
So EDMs are a way to combat these problems and try and revitalize communities.
So aside from EDMOs, what other kind of challenges does the Act address?
Well, we've talked about HMOs in detail,
Yeah.
but overcrowding can actually be a problem in any type of rental accommodation.
Right, so cramming too many people into a small space.
Exactly. And that's something that the Act specifically addresses,
Okay.
particularly within HMOs.
Okay.
Local authorities have the power to issue overcrowding notices
Okay.
if they find too many people living in a property
Right.
based on the number of rooms and the size of the space.
Okay, so if I try and squeeze like 10 people into a tiny 2-bedroom flat,
You might get a knock on the door.
I might get a knock on the door from the local authority.
These overcrowding notices require the landlord or the occupants
Okay.
to reduce the number of people living there to comply with standards.
Standards. So there are standards for how many people can live in a certain space.
Yes, there are.
Okay.
So these standards will take into account things like the size and layout of the property,
Okay.
the number of rooms,
Yeah.
even the age and gender of the occupants.
Okay.
It's all about making sure that everyone has adequate space and privacy.
That seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah, it's not about trying to punish anyone.
Right.
It's just about trying to make sure everyone has a safe and comfortable place to live.
What happens if someone just ignores an overcrowding notice?
Well, that can lead to prosecution
Okay.
and fines,
Okay.
because overcrowding can create unhealthy and potentially unsafe living conditions.
Right, but, determining overcrowding must involve some level of judgment.
Yeah.
What if someone disagrees with that notice?
Well, that's why the Act allows for appeals
Okay.
against overcrowding notices.
Okay.
So if a landlord or tenant believes the notice is unfair
Right.
or inaccurate,
Yeah.
they can challenge it through a tribunal.
Okay, so there's a process to make sure that everything is fair and accurate.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've looked at HMOs, licensing, enforcement, tenant rights, EDMOs, and now overcrowding. It's a lot, but it seems like the Housing Act tries to cover all the bases
It really does.
when it comes to creating a fair and safe rental market.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance
Yeah,
between protecting landlords and protecting tenants.
absolutely. But there's one last crucial piece we need to discuss.
Uh-oh, what's that?
The financial side of all of this.
Ah,
We've kind of hinted at it,
yeah.
but we haven't really dived into the details.
No.
So stay tuned for part 3, where we unravel the financial implications of breaking the rules.
Oh, I'm excited for that one.
Yeah.
The Act really tries to make sure that non-compliance doesn't pay.
It does, so we'll see you then. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Housing Act of 2004.
Back for more.
We have gone through so much stuff.
We have. It's a big act.
Yeah, from understanding those HMOs and licensing
Right.
to exploring the rights and responsibilities of landlords and tenants.
Making sure everyone's on the same page?
Yeah, but I think there's this one underlying theme.
What's that?
The financial consequences of not playing by the rules.
Yes, the money part.
Yeah. So today we're going to unpack those details.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so we've mentioned rent repayment orders a couple of times.
We have. They're a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
They're a key way that the Act makes sure that landlords who break the rules don't actually benefit financially.
Okay, so just as a refresher,
Yeah.
can you remind us exactly how those rent repayment orders work?
Okay, so if a landlord is operating an HMO without a license, when they should have one,
Right,
or if they haven't complied with an improvement or prohibition order,
right.
the tenants can apply for a rent repayment order.
And who decides that?
The tribunal.
The tribunal, okay.
That independent body that we talked about earlier,
Right.
they're the ones who assess the evidence
Mhm.
and decide if the landlord has actually broken the rules.
Right.
And if the tenant is entitled to get back some of the rent that they paid during that time.
Okay, so this could be a lot of money we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, in some cases, a tenant could get back up to 12 months worth of rent.
12 months.
It's a big incentive for landlords to follow the rules.
That is a lot of money.
It is.
Wow. That really shows how seriously the Act takes these matters.
It does.
So just to be clear, it's not like, all the tenants can just suddenly demand refunds.
No, there's a process.
There's a process. Okay.
They need to apply to the tribunal.
Okay.
They need to provide evidence.
Right.
They need to make their case.
Okay.
And then the tribunal makes the decision.
So what happens if the landlord disagrees with the decision?
Well, they can appeal.
Okay.
But as we've said before, appeals are not always successful.
Right.
There are very specific grounds for appealing a rent repayment order.
Okay.
And the process can be quite complex.
So it's not just a get-out-of-jail-free card.
No, not at all.
Okay, so rent repayment orders are a major financial consequence
Right.
for landlords who don't comply with the Act. But we also talked about, local authorities having some other penalties that they can impose.
Ah, yes, the other tools in the toolbox.
Yeah, can you remind us what those are?
Sure. So remember those civil penalties?
Yes, those are kind of like fines, right?
They are like fines, but for less serious offenses.
Okay.
Things that wouldn't necessarily end up in court.
Right,
They're a way for local authorities to respond proportionately,
right.
depending on what the actual breach is.
Okay,
So the amounts for civil penalties are usually going to be lower than fines,
okay.
but they could still add up.
Yeah, they can add up, yeah.
Landlords need to be on the ball.
Yeah,
They really need to understand the rules,
yeah.
because otherwise those consequences, those financial consequences, can be pretty significant.
Well, I think we've done it.
I think we have.
We have navigated the very intricate world of the Housing Act of 2004.
It's a beast of an act, but we did it.
We did it.
We unpacked complex legal terms. We explored all sorts of different scenarios.
Yeah, highlighted the key takeaways.
Absolutely.
This act affects the lives of millions of people in England.
It does. It's a really important piece of legislation.
Yeah, it sets the standards for a fair and safe private rental sector.
Right. It's about protecting both sides.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive
It's been a pleasure.
into the Housing Act of 2004.
Fascinating stuff.
We hope you learned something new and interesting,
I hope so, too.
and that you'll join us again for another deep dive
Yes. Definitely come back for more.
into a different fascinating piece of legislation.
Absolutely. There's a whole world out there.
Okay, see you then.
Bye.